Hello students. In this class, let's look into the exceptions to the law of demand. The law of demand states that the quantity demanded for a good or service rises as the price falls, other things being equal. Therefore, the law of demand is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. But many a times people behave contrary to what we expect according to the law of demand. Such behavior, we call them as exceptions to the law of demand. In such cases, the demand curve slopes upward to the right. In the case of law of demand, what is the shape of the demand curve? The demand curve slopes downward to the right. But in the case of exceptions to the law of demand, we see that the demand curve slopes upward to the right. So here you see the figure wherein on the x-axis we have represented quantity demanded, and on the y-axis we have represented price. So when the price is OP2, what is the quantity demanded? The quantity demanded is OQ2. When the price is OP, what is the quantity demanded? The price is OQ. When the price is OP1, what is the quantity demanded? The price is OQ1. Here, what do we see in this graph? We see that when the price increases from OP to OP1, the quantity demanded also increases from OQ to OQ1. Or when you see that when the price falls from OP to OP2, the quantity demanded also decreases from OQ to OQ2. So here this is an exception to the law of demand where the demand curve slopes upward to the right. In the normal circumstances, that is according to the law of demand, the demand curve slopes downward. But here, under the exceptions to the law of demand, we have an upward sloping demand curve. The law of demand under the case of exceptions, it means under certain cases the law of demand does not apply. Those are the exceptions. Now let's see what are the exceptions to the law of demand. When you say exceptions, it means the law of demand does not apply to certain cases. So one such exception can be explained under the heading, namely Giffen's paradox. Sir Robert Giffen, an economist, observed that when the price of bread increased, the low-paid British workers in the early 19th century purchased more bread and not less of it. This phenomenon is a direct contradiction to the law of demand. The reason given for this is that these British workers consumed a diet of mostly bread, and when the price of bread went up, they were compelled to spend more on a fixed quantity of bread. Therefore, they could not afford to purchase as much meat, which was another commodity that they consumed, as before. They substituted bread for meat to maintain their intake of food and calories. So here, a given good is considered to be a strongly inferior good. It is when consumers consume more of an inferior good when the price of good rises, which is the direct violation of the law of demand. Now, for example, for staple foods like rice, now we consume, most of the low income group, the main commodity consumed is rice. That is a staple food. Now, when the price of rice rises, people with lower incomes will spend less on the superior goods and consume more of staple goods, which is an inferior good like rice. So this is what we call as a Giffen's paradox. So this is an important exception to the law of demand. So a Giffen good is defined as inferior good. So that is in early Ireland, that is in the 19th century. It was observed that the poor population consumed two goods. One is meat, which is costly, and the other is bread, which is cheap. So here, a very strange phenomenon was observed when the price of bread increased. So when the price of bread increased, the poor people could not consume both, that is bread and meat. So what did they do? They were forced to cut down the consumption of meat, which is a costly good, and buy more of bread. Even when the price of bread increased, what did they do? They cut down their consumption of meat in order to buy more of bread, which was their staple food. This implied that the quantity demanded of bread, which is supposed to be an inferior good, increased even when the price of the bread increased. So here it was Robert Giffen, an economist, who first gave an explanation to this situation. Hence, such goods are called Giffen goods or inferior goods. So it must be noted that such cases would occur only when a considerable part of the income is spent on an inferior good. I hope it is clear. So this is called as Giffen's paradox, where the law of demand does not apply. It is considered as an exception to the law of demand, where the demand curve slopes upward. That is, the demand for bread increases with the increase in the price, mainly because that is one of their staple food items. And the second case of an exception is discussed under Veblen goods. So this is yet another exception to the law of demand. So this exception is associated with the name of the economist Thorstein Veblen, who propounded the doctrine of conspicuous consumption. Thorstein Veblen suggested that some people viewed higher utility in higher priced goods, meaning to say that there are some people who would like to buy more of those goods where the prices are higher. This is called as conspicuous consumption. That is, people here, under such cases, people would like to buy those goods which are high priced. For example, Economists often view diamonds as a Veblen good because of the higher prestige value of a diamond. Another example is Rolls-Royce cars. This also can be considered as a Veblen good because such goods tend to give some kind of a status symbol to the consumer. There is some kind of display of wealth. People get more pleasure when their wealth is displayed. That becomes a status symbol, or we also call them as prestige goods. So, the law of demand does not apply to those commodities which are used as status symbol. Status symbol implies enhancing social prestige or for displaying wealth and riches. The consumer here measures the satisfaction derived from these commodities not by their utility value but by social status. So, this is an example of conspicuous consumption, that is, namely, diamond is an example of conspicuous consumption. In such cases, price and quantity move in the same direction. They always love to buy those goods which are high priced. So, such goods we call them as Veblen goods, which is named after the American economist, namely Thorstein Veblen. So, here also the demand curve does not take a downward slope curve. It normally takes Z-shaped curve. And another area where the law of demand does not work is in the case of expectations regarding future price changes. The law of demand does not apply if the prices of a commodity are expected to change in the near future. In such cases, the consumers may behave opposite to the law of demand. For instance, in pre-budget month, prices of certain commodities tend to rise. Yet, people buy more in anticipation of further rise in price due to a rise in tax rates. Similarly, when consumers anticipate a further fall in prices, what do? They buy less of it, expecting that the price would fall still further. That is, when the prices are falling, as per law of demand, what should happen? The demand increases. But in this case, expecting a further fall in prices, what do? They postpone their purchase rather than buying more when there is a fall in the price, just to take advantage of any further fall in price. Yet another case which can be considered as an exception to the law of demand is in the case of speculative market. In the speculative market, a rise in prices is frequently followed by larger purchases and a fall in price by smaller purchases. For instance, when share prices rise, people expect further rise and rush to buy so as to make gains. But when share prices fall, they wait for further fall and stop buying. So this is a speculative market. Speculative market is a market where people buy and sell in order to make short-term gains. So what do? When share prices rise, people expect further rise. And what do? They rush to buy so that they can sell it at higher prices again. But when share prices fall, they wait for further fall and stop buying. Either way, they want to make shorter gains. So this is what we call, I am as speculative market, and under the speculative market the law of demand may not work. Yet another case of an exception to the law of demand is the law of demand does not apply in the period of emergencies like war, famine, etc. During such period of during such period, what happens to the availability of goods? The availability of goods becomes uncertain. And we also see during when the availability of goods becomes uncertain, the prices are increasing. But what is the reaction of the consumers? Consumers would prefer to store the goods of their daily use even if their prices increase. Now, during times of, say, lockdown, expecting that you will not be able to get goods on a daily basis, what do? You store more of the goods even if the prices are on the higher side. So, these are all emergency situations. It may happen during war, famine, or any untoward incidents which is not expected. So, all these are considered to be exceptions to the law of demand. Okay. So, in the next class, let's discuss on a separate topic under demand itself, that is under Unit 2, and that topic will be on increase and decrease in demand. So far, whatever we have discussed under law of demand, we call them as extension and contraction of demand. That is, when the prices rise, demand contracts. So we call it as contraction of demand. When prices fall, demand expands or extends, or we call that as extension of demand. So the normal law of demand explains the extension and contraction of demand. So we need to study a topic under the heading increase and decrease in demand. This is expressed as changes in demand. When there is change in demand, the demand curve changes in position, its position. Here there is a shift in the demand curve. So here the demand, in the case of increase and decrease in demand, demand changes not due to the changes in the price but due to the result of the change in factors or conditions determining demand. So this is expressed by shifting of the demand curve on the graph. So let's discuss this topic, namely increase and decrease in demand, in the next class. That's all for now. Thank you.